Good evening. This is Maestro Cotello with a Dawn of War 2 Retribution Elite modcast. Today we have a 1v1 on Greentooth Gorge. Our first player today is Viking NieDan. He is playing as the Orc Warboss. The Orc Warboss is a tanky melee hero. He is very good at disruption with stomping. He can get a power claw later on to make him really good at anything, and he has some really great buffs like Use Your Choppas and Ard Boys. Viking's opponent today is Hypothecary, playing as the Plague Champion. The Plague Champion starts out as a ranged hero. He can be changed into a melee hero if you choose to get those war gears. He does quite a few things. He's in some ways a combination of all three Space Marine heroes combined. He can be a tanky melee hero if you kit him out that way. He can be a ranged hero if you choose to stick with his bolter. He can repair a bit. He can build a turret. He can even heal friendly units. So this is my second replay of games that I am pulling out of my big mountain of user submissions in my inbox. As I said, the 3 replays I'm submitting today are all going to be user submissions, and I want to acknowledge the person who submitted them. In this case, it was this Viking NieDan or NieDan guy. I'm just going to call him Viking because it's going to make my life easier, but he submitted the replay to me. It's this 1v1, and he actually said that they, both players here are relatively new. I don't really recognize the names. And I checked their profiles, and they both have about 300 hours. But we still see that they understand the basics a little bit. Viking right there was using the yellow cover of the trees in the middle right there. They are, in fact, yellow cover. To make sure that he takes less damage, which is probably particularly important for these really fragile shooter boys. As it is, they will pretty much lose to Chaos Space Marines individually. So you really want to make sure you're in cover, so you're taking as few losses as you can with your shooter boys. Here Viking has actually taken the garrison, which of course garrisons in this game are... You're practically immune to damage. That's not entirely accurate. You take some damage, but the damage modifier is huge. You take really very little damage from once you have a squad inside a garrison. It also, of course, acts as a melee counter. I don't know if people even remember that, but basically melee units do absolutely nothing to a unit inside a garrison. Unless it is a unit with splash damage, in which case it splashes into the building, which doesn't make any sense either, but that's just how it works for some reason. And Viking at this point is choosing to get out of the garrison. He should actually harass these heretics. He should pretty much just harass them to force them off, to force a retreat, and if they approach, he can jump right back inside the garrison. And, I mean, he did ultimately just force them off, got some bleed, and... scared Hypothecary off from getting that capture off. Now, this matchup, the Plague Champion versus the Warboss, is not one it's not one I play a whole lot. Obviously, we have Chaos against the Warboss, but this matchup really does change quite a bit depending on the hero. The Sorcerer is terrible against the Warboss, so I really don't have a whole lot of insight from that perspective, but the Plague Champion definitely does do a little bit. He definitely does do better than the Sorcerer. So we already have some Raptors out from Hypothecary. Now those Raptors, they obviously function very well as a hard counter to either Shooter Boy squad, any ranged unit really, as well as setup teams especially. And right now, that's going to work out particularly well against Viking, as long as he has all of his units split up. Those Raptors would be, again, they'll be very effective against the Shooter Boys if the Shooter Boys are isolated. So what Viking could do to really make those Raptors less useful is making sure he has either his Warboss, his Sluggers, or both around a Shooter Boy squad when it gets jumped, so that he can counter-initiate with the Warboss and the Sluggers against the Raptors, with likely bleed models from the Raptors, which is something that Hypothecary really does not want to happen, those Raptor models. I don't remember the exact cost, but it is going to be something like on the order of 60 to 70 something requisition, as well as having a power cost. So not cheap at all. You really don't want to lose Raptor models. Warboss, we already see, has been upgraded with the big stomp. So to the extent that he's going to counter-initiate against the Raptors, he's actually going to be extremely useful. That big stomp increases the damage of the stomp by a bit, as well as adding that stun. That being said, the Warboss is in a bit of trouble, retreating away from these Raptors, as well as the Raptors actually have enough for a jump, so they might actually take out this Warboss right here. Very close. 5. Can they finish off with bolt pistol? Wow, what did he even die from? I didn't even see. It looks like they were done shooting, but either way, Warboss down. So, and although I missed it, it looks like maybe over here, Hypothecary also lost a Heretic squad. So Hypothecary did lose a model off of those Chaos Raptors, but he did at least kill the Warboss, so it's a pretty fair trade in his favor. That Warboss is going to be cost 250 requisition to repurchase, whereas these Raptors, although there is a power cost associated with them, this is a terrible idea. As it is, you really don't want Raptors jumping into a fight with Slugger Boys, even if they're at full health. And these Raptors actually had very little health, and I think they're actually just going to get wiped right here. So that's just something, that's a piece of knowledge that that you might not necessarily have as a new player. Basically just knowing what unit beats what. It's something that I've studied pretty extensively, so I just know it's very instinctive, just something that's very natural. Basically just when I'm playing, I know not to jump Raptors into Slugger Boys, because I know that the Slugger Boys pretty much win. And there are definitely some exceptions, and it depends on so many different factors, like how much each unit has going into the engagement. But I just know in general that jumping Raptors into a squad of Slugger Boys is going to be a bad idea. And that's something that I guess Hypothecary wasn't terribly familiar with. But Hypothecary, as we can see, Viking is actually already into Tier 2 and is purchasing a Death Dread. Meanwhile, Hypothecary has not even started Tier 2. He does just about now have the resources to do it. Part of that was he did go for a longer Tier 1. He had that 4th squad in the form of those Raptors, which he has now lost. He also made heavy investments into his Plague Champion, fully upgraded with Mucus Discharge, Fetid Armor, and the Sword of Undeath, and he's actually been doing pretty well with that setup. We saw he's been creating some Slugger Zombies, and this war gear, or the Plague Champion in general with melee warriors, is considered a very, very strong counter to melee squads. Now, he also has the Fetid Armor. That's a Tier 1 warrior for him. Doesn't give the huge health bonus that the Armor of Pestilence gives, but it also doesn't have that movement speed penalty on a hero who's already very slow. It also gives him an ability that damages and suppresses, so that can also potentially be very good against a melee counter, since it's doing area of effect damage, which would be very, very effective against something like Sluggers. But Hypothecary is just now in a very, very precarious situation, where he's not even in Tier 2 yet, and we have this Death Dread going around. Now, a vehicle is always something that is very, very tough to deal with, just in terms of it's something you have to learn in the game. It's when you transition from Tier 1 to Tier 2, you have to deal with that transition of either you get a vehicle to put that pressure on your opponent, or your opponent gets a vehicle, and then you have to respond with some kind of anti-vehicle. The consequences for not responding adequately is that since a vehicle is pretty much immune to most other forms of damage, particularly the range damage from the piercing weapons of most Tier 1 range squads, is that the player with the vehicle can pretty much have free reign, and right now Viking can pretty much do whatever he wants. And one of the things he should be doing is bashing a little harder than he is right now, because that's one of the things that can happen when you don't have a vehicle in time. You can get a full generator bash, and to be honest, Viking should already have a full generator bash. He should be using the Burnas on his Death Dread instead of using the melee weapons, as well as having his Burna Sluggas. Instead of capturing these side points, they should be over there bashing these generators as well. So Hypothecary has heavily invested into power. He's got a completely separate full power farm, aside from the one that he has on his natural. Now again, right here we see Viking using the melee weapons of the Death Dread, which, I mean, ultimately it works too, but you would just be bashing faster using the burners. So that's just something you need to switch to range stance with the Death Dread so that it can actually start using its ranged weapons on these generators. And unfortunately, that critical period of advantage that Viking had is now completely gone, as Hypothecary has put a superior walker on the field. Now, this Death Dread is great for so many reasons. First of all, because it's so cheap. Even in its upgraded form, it's a lot cheaper than this Chaos Dreadnought. It's a terrible idea to walk that Death Dread closer to the Chaos Dreadnought when it's already losing. And because you can get it early, it's a potentially rushable vehicle. And then it has those burners and bits upgrades, which makes it very, very good for capitalizing exactly on the kind of advantage you get out of rushing a vehicle, which is that you can take map control and completely destroy your opponent's power farm. We have Touch of Nurgle right here to use against the Warboss, which I don't think is the greatest use of Touch of Nurgle. Ultimately, it works for the purpose of allowing Hypothecary to capture Viking's natural VP. I just don't actually think that's really worth the red of actually using Touch of Nurgle. And I mean, generally you use Touch of Nurgle to actually win engagements. And that is such a great global. One of the great things about the Plague Champion. The Plague Champion, there have been times when I kind of thought he was the worst chaos hero, but I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure whether the Plague Champion or the Sorcerer is better or worse than the other. It's definitely the Chaos Lord is definitely the best Chaos hero. But what is really good about the Plague Champion is that he definitely has the best set of globals. At least that's in my opinion. In particular, that Touch of Nurgle is really an engagement winner global that you really just can't mess around with. If you don't respect it and you don't either control the unit with Touch of Nurgle or retreat out of there, you are probably going to lose a squad. Now right here we have that Death Dread actually went down, in part because the Chaos Dreadnought has been upgraded with the Mark of Tzeentch, giving it actually a huge amount of anti-vehicle firepower. It is going to win quite a bit over a Death Dread because it will do a lot of anti-vehicle damage as the Death Dread tries to close in for melee with the Chaos Dreadnought. Although the Death Dread does do more melee damage than the Chaos Dreadnought in this ranged form. Now we have heavy melee purchases on both of the heroes here. We have a fully upgraded Warboss, the Cyborg implants. Ooh, and we have another Touch of Nurgle. Man, the cooldown on that is not that... The cooldown on that is obviously not that long. Although the amount it costs definitely keeps it in check. We also have some Slugger Boys getting a little overzealous, and they may just about get wiped here. Now this is an opportunity. Hypothecary should be already moving his heretics in range of those Slugger Boys so that he can... No, too late, man. Way too late. But just knowing that, given that he saw those Slugger Boys, he really should have... Once he saw those Slugger Boys retreating, he should have already started moving his heretics in the middle of the Slugger Boys retreat path, and that would have been a wipe on the Slugger Boys. Let's take a look at the Plague Champion right here. He's on the floor. Oops. He seems to be glowing with disease. But we have a Plague Marine squad out of Hypothecary, which is a curious purchase. I don't think he got that. I mean, that would have been a good choice if the Death Dread were still alive. I don't know if he started getting that when the Death Dread was still alive. Right now, it's definitely not the best purchase he could make. Since those Plague Marines, they don't do a hell of a lot. They do a little bit of range damage, and they can kind of win over some ranged units, not because of their damage, but just because of their staying power. Otherwise, they're mostly a meat shield, a screen, and a capping unit, and a gen basher. And these Plague Marines are very, very overextended. And he loses 3... Wow, and he comes very close to losing the entire squad. I would actually say that, now this is one of the things where I typically have most of my squads on Overwatch and just let them automatically reinforce every time. Plague Marines are a squad where, especially right now, I'd say maybe he doesn't need to reinforce all of those models. I mean, the Plague Marines, they don't need to have all of their models to use their missile launcher. Right now, they don't even really need to use their missile launcher, but it just may not necessarily be worth it to reinforce all of those Plague Marine models. Hypothecary is not doing that well economically, despite having such a huge power farm, but I think it's that he's lost a lot, so he's had to purchase a lot of new things. He is reinforcing them. They are 56 and 5 power to reinforce, which is pretty expensive considering how relatively little those Plague Marine models actually do. But we also have, never mind, Plague Champions are down right here, but I wanted to point out that Hypothecary kind of re-outfitted his Plague Champion, which is expensive, and we'll go into that more if he actually revives his Plague Champion. But it's a triple cap for Hypothecary. And Hypothecary is now going for a bit of a generator bash with these level 3 Khorne Chaos Space Marines. Unfortunately, I have not seen a whole lot out of these Khorne Chaos Space Marines. But they are a beastly unit. I always say that. It's just often hard to justify getting them because it's hard to fit them into your composition, with Chaos Space Marines generally being the best and most convenient source of range DPS for the Chaos Army, whereas Chaos has many other sources of melee that are... most of the other sources of melee are either not quite as good as the Khorne Chaos Space Marines, or they just serve a slightly different purpose. Oh, and we might have a squad go down here. Slugger Boy's going to go down. Wow. A very, very good save from Viking to use aiming. What's that? Suppressing the heretics. I'm pretty sure that would have been a wipe on the Slugger Boys there as well. Slugger Boy's almost level 3. And we do have a lot of leveling on a lot of units, despite all the units that Hypothecary has lost. Although I suppose his preservation has been good since Tier 2. He's got level 2 Plague Marines. He's also got a level 3 Chaos Dreadnought, level 3 Chaos Space Marines, and even level 3 Heretics. Now, oh, this is very interesting. So we have Knobs against the Khorne Space Marines. Knobs have activated Frenzy. However, the Plague Champion is about to use... He used both Pestilent Strike and Mucus Discharge, and now the Khorne Space Marines are actually doing very, very well against the Knobs, and they're winning against the Knobs. Didn't even need that touch of Nurgle. 2 Knob models go down, so that ended up being a major win for Hypothecary. So he actually knows how to deal with Knobs. That's pretty much exactly how you deal with Knobs as the Plague Champion. The Plague Champion is definitely a hero with some very, very good answers to Knobs. We saw the Pestilent Strike from the Plague Fist, and then he followed it up with just the DPS from the Khorne Space Marines, which is really, really good. And that's pretty much how you deal with Knobs as the Plague Champion. Then there are other ways too. You can also have Tzeentch Chaos Space Marines. You can also have Heretics with Touch of Nurgle. He's got a lot of answers to Knobs. But yeah, we see this Plague Champion has re-outfitted himself. He has the Plague Fist and now the Armor of Pestilence. So this is it's very expensive to fully upgrade your Plague Champion and then completely change his war gears. But it can work out. Certainly this build right here with both the Armor of Pestilence and the Plague Fist just scales very, very well. It's one of the best answers to those infantry-based Tier 3 super units. And whereas that other build with the Sword of Undeath and the Fetid Armor is actually something that does not scale particularly well, even though it's very, very good against the weaker, less durable melee units like Banshees, like Slugger Boys, etc. Especially Heretics. Oh god, it is extremely devastating against Heretics, since you can create zombies with the Sword of Undeath, and then you can actually detonate Heretic zombies on a Heretic squad itself, which is absolutely devastating. But Hypothecary has gone to Tier 3. I was actually questioning that decision, but he actually has a lot of resources right now. He's obviously saving up for either a Great Unclean One or a Land Raider Phobos. Great Unclean One would probably be a better choice at the moment. But I'm just a little concerned with the fact that it's a triple cap against him, and he's running out of time. And he's having trouble winning this engagement. It may have been a better decision for him to either stay in Tier 2, get out some kind of other unit, another squad of Chaos Space Marines, another Dreadnought, a squad of Bloodletters, rather than to go all the way to Tier 3 to try to get out a super unit. And I mean, that super unit has a totally different effect than any of the things that I just mentioned. And it could potentially be, this could potentially be better. Mainly the consequence of what he's doing, of the choice that he made, is that he's cutting it very close. He's about to get a double cap back in his favor, but he doesn't have much time. And even once he gets this double cap, he really can't afford to let the VPs change hands anymore. If he had done something more like what I had done, there would be more potential that he could would have been able to fight back better and not even let the VPs get this close. Now, this is also something where this is not a good situation for Hypothecary. He's running the Chaos Dreadnought back to his base because because we often figure that like bases are safe and stuff. But the right decision in that situation would have actually been to walk the Dreadnought toward his heretics, because the heretics had touch of Nurgle. They would have been able to disrupt the knobs, and that would have been what Hypothecary would have needed in order to save his Dreadnought. Oh no, unfortunately our rocks, and that's probably going to be a GG. Looks like he's actually mostly dodging the rocks. What I think he won't be able to dodge is the cap that the Warboss is making on this middle VP. I don't think Hypothecary will be able to get enough of his units out in time. He also just doesn't have as much of an army as Viking does. He also lost his play champion apparently again over here. So he's really only got seconds to get a unit on the point. I don't think we'll see it. As it is, I mean, Viking is really going to have a bit of trouble actually fighting this Great Unclean One, but he probably won't have to. Now, what Hypothecary really needs to do, he has his Khorne Chaos Space Marines out here. They need to start capturing this point immediately, and then he needs to move the Great Unclean One back to the middle so that they can disrupt and defend. Unfortunately, that's not what he's done, so this game looks like it will end in favor of Viking. So again, this was a submission by Viking, second of my replay submission honor day. This was, as was told to me, was a bit of a game between newer players. I feel, and I know some people may not like that, some people may. I feel that I've submitted enough high-level replayers lately to justify at least 1 or 2 games of some newer players. And of course, if not, you can always choose not to watch it, although if you're hearing this right now, you've already watched it. In any case, hope you enjoyed the cast. Have a good night.